We all laughed and thought not more about it. But on our return in the evening to the village, we found the Maoris in great excitement about the apparition, and on speaking to the owner of the hotel, he assured us no canoe as we described now existed. Louise sighs.
To the best of my knowledge, to this very day, they've never been able to figure out exactly what it was they did see, whether it was a real canoe, whether it was a phantom one. They never got to the bottom of what is a continuing mystery.
Tarawera's venerable and now feared tohunga had no doubts about what Sophia and the tourists had seen.
I went back to him and asked him, what's the signs of that wairua? So he said, you've seen it, so there's trouble ahead, all the families. He said, all these lands here be demolished by the mountain.
About a fortnight before the eruption occurred, a dog kept howling under their house. Animals have a sense that we don't possess, and that's the only thing she ever mentioned.
The day before the eruption was extremely cold. Sophia Hinerangi was not feeling well. She had risen early to do her washing in the freezing cold waters of the Tarawera stream, which ran behind her whare. After a couple of hours, she was chilled to the marrow and went shivering back to bed. Beneath Tarawera, the column of magma was inexorably forcing its way towards eruption. By a cruel twist of fate, the 9th of June was the birthday of Charles Hazard's wife, Amelia. At about 10:15, the Hazards ventured out into the cold night to see a conjunction of the Moon and Mars. The quarter moon and the bright planet were clearly visible in the still, cloudless sky. The Hazards' oldest daughter, Clara, later wrote,
It must have been after 11 when at last we retired to rest. How well I remember, as we walked across the veranda which connected the sitting room with our sleeping apartments. We looked up at the now starlit sky, and Mr. Blythe remarked, What a lovely night. We will have a fine day tomorrow. I never hear that, but I again see the starlit night, the old veranda half covered with creepers, and the calm, silent lake in the distance, and hear a voice now hushed forever say the same words. Then I think of the morrow that came to us. Clara Hazard.
In Auckland on the night of the eruption, an excited Charles Blomfield was up late. His wife Ellen had given birth to their first son. As was usual, the baby was born at home. Charles was racing upstairs to wake his 3 daughters and give them the news when he heard a loud bang.
Before they could go into their mother's bedroom to see the baby, they heard this noise, so they ran out onto the top veranda. They couldn't see anything, but this noise kept on going, and Mum grabbed his hand and she said it was trembling.
The first indication, I suppose, that something was wrong was the enormous explosions that were heard. They were heard in Auckland, they were heard in Wellington, they were heard all over the North Island. And people imagined that there were cannons going off.
I had only lain down about 5 minutes when I felt the earthquake coming, heaving up the ground like waves. I went down to my 2 old aunties' whare and asked them, What is this? For the earth was shaking and heaving, but the 2 women said, Oh, it's all right, it will be finished soon. But it did not finish. Sophia Hinerangi.
Grandfather went out onto the veranda and he saw a tremendous glow in the sky and saw that the mountain was in eruption, and he called Grandma and the family, come out and have a look.
We went onto the veranda, and what a sight met our eyes. Over the mountains loomed a cloud of jetty blackness, and through it rolled great balls of fire, chasing one another in the ebon mass, and dancing a wild, fantastic dance like so many demons let loose by the powers of darkness. My father said, "What a grand sight! Should we live 100 years, we shall never see again its equal. It is the most wonderful sight I have ever seen." Clara Hazard.
There was this giant black cloud that indicated straight away that something terrible was happening, filled with lightning, the thunder, and it must have been a terrifying experience. And then suddenly the enormous flash of fire that came up from the mountain right into the sky was lit up. It must have been an awesome sight.
When things became to be a bit of a worry, I believe my Aunt Clara played and sang, played the organ and sang.
I thought the music would keep the children from being frightened. I was joined by my father and others. The shaking increased to such an extent that the vases were thrown from the mantelpiece and a small table was upset. The noise was deafening. Clara Hazard. A stone broke through the roof and stuck half through the ceiling. We dared not venture outside in such a storm. Would the house stand? We tried to open the door. It was jammed so tightly that we could not force it open. Calm despair was written now on every face, and no one spoke their fears. Even the little ones were quiet. Clara Hazard.
At Tarawera, the view of Tarawera was obscured by a hill. With little sense of danger, many of the European inhabitants walked to the top of a nearby ridge to get a better view.
Our feelings at this time were more of awe than fear. No one thought of escaping from the place. The majesty of the spectacle held us spellbound. William Byrd.
By now, the rift that split Tarawera was travelling rapidly toward the Pink and White Terraces on Lake Rotomahana. No one had any idea of the cataclysm that would occur as soon as that rift reached the geothermal system beneath the terraces. Up on Tamu Hill, some of the spectators noticed a cloud advancing from the south. But the sinister import of what appeared to be a rain cloud was entirely missed.
It wasn't the mountain that caused the greatest amount of havoc. It was when the bed of Lake Rotomahana split and the waters went down into the magma that was boiling, became superheated steam and exploded, and up into the air went the accumulation of probably thousands of years of mud and silt, boiling at the time. And it was that dropped onto everything that caused the terrible disaster. I mean, there was, I think, 50 or 60 feet of this boiling mud dumped on Tauriki village.
When the hydrothermal system beneath the lake was triggered into eruption by the magma penetrating it, the lake bed beneath Rotomahana was obliterated. As the torrent of mud rained down, many Maori abandoned their whare, but Mohi and his wife stayed, fighting to protect their children from the rising tide of mud.
The roof of my whare had now smashed in with lava, stones and mud. To save the life of the elder boy, I wrapped him in a shawl and knelt over the little one that its body should not receive any hurt. But the drift rose so quickly around my body that the little one was soon covered, and I had to keep throwing it aside with one arm to keep it away. I had my hands on the ground and was also on my knees, so as to provide shelter for the little one. I thus formed a resting place for the increasing fall of mud. The mud was very heavy on my back. I made a desperate effort and flung it off, and taking up the little one I called to my wife to be quick and follow. To my horror, I found both my loved ones had died silently by my side. Mohi.
Both Maori and Europeans sought shelter in the meeting house of Hinemihi and in Sophia's whare, the strong ridge poles and slanting roofs affording much better protection than the flatter-roofed European buildings.
At last there were 62 people in the whare. The noise never ceased and the terrible roaring was continuous. All the people in the whare were terrified. They wanted to rush out, But I would not let them go, saying, "No, you shall not go out, you will be killed. You must stay here. At least we can all die together." So whaia Hinerangi.
At the Hazard's house, a deadly deposit of mud and ash was quickly building up on the roof and against the walls.
They were standing in the middle of the room, and the roof fell in, but Grandma had an uneasy